Magnus Carlsen is the strongest chess player to walk the earth today. He reigned world champion for an entire decade, but before him, Vishwanathan Anand held the title. And I'm about to show you the game that made Magnus the new world champion back in 2013. Make sure you stick around. Welcome to round 10 of the World Chess Championship back in 2013. Magnus has 6 points against Vishy's 3. All Magnus needs is half a point more in order to win the World Chess Championship. He only needs a draw in this game, so let's see what he's able to do. And he has the white pieces at that. So we have a Sicilian defense. Never heard of it. We have bishop b5 check, the knight blocks on d7. This is all normal stuff. It's been seen thousands of times by grandmasters. And, you know, the bishop takes. So Magnus temporarily gives up the bishop pair, right? Giving Vishy these very nice bishops here, but not for long. We'll see how he takes care of that. We have c4, which takes us into slightly less common waters here. If you look at the database here, there's been still over 1,500 games, 1,700 games even, but as soon as c4 is played, we're down to less than 500 games. And then if you play a few moves further, here, already 20 games, 5 games. So it doesn't take us too long, about like 10 to 12 moves to get into, you know, pretty unknown territory. So let's see. We have c4, knight f6, bishop g5. Okay, e6, preparing to get this dark squared bishop to e7 to block the pin on the knight and prepare castles for black. We have knight c3, adding defense to the e4 pawn, bishop e7, and castles. Now bishop c6, okay, piling pressure onto the e4 pawn. So Magnus drops the queen back, preparing to get the knight into d4 to take care of this really annoying bishop, right? This bishop has the potential to cause some annoying problems for white. So Magnus clears the way for the knight coming into d4. And after b3, creating a little pawn chain here, Magnus decides to chop that bishop off the board. So Vishy no longer has the bishop pair, and let's see what happens. We have rook a to c8 here, bringing the rook to the c-file, possibly preparing b4 so that the c-pawn is going to be well defended in some future where the knight is gone from the c-file and you want to push the pawn to b4. It's just an improving move to the position, right? h6. Now the bishop has a choice. The bishop can take on f6, but this is not good because after bishop takes f6, well, you've put all your pawns on light squares and given your opponent the only dark squared bishop in this universe of this chess game. So the dark squares are going to be completely dominated by the bishop. I mean, look at all of these. This is all territory for the bishop to call home. Okay, so that doesn't happen. Magnus instead goes back to e3, controlling, or, keeping an eye on the dark squares on the queen side. And then he actually goes to d4, keeping the bishop nice and centralized here so it can see the king side and the queen side. Okay. We have rook f to d8, centralizing the rook, and Magnus plays h3, creates some luft, brings his rook as well, so they are improving their position, slowly but surely. And queen to a5, starting to create a little something here with the queen. Vishy activating the queen along the 5th rank, and swinging all the way over to h5. Now, if you notice a little something happening here, you're not crazy. The king walking to f8 here, which I could not explain to you guys. If you know what the point of king f8 is, then let me know in the comments, because I really don't know. Especially because after queen b2, the king just goes back to g8. I think it's just a waiting move. I think it is just a waiting move, but it is one of the top computer moves, so it's interesting. But yeah, Vishy decides to just kind of go back and forth, waiting to see what Magnus does, and after a4, gaining space on the queen side, clamping on the b5 squares so that b5 is no longer possible for black, Vishy swings the queen over to h5, getting it to the king side, maybe trying to get something going here, maybe get the bishop involved, maybe the knight's coming back in, something, right? But then we have knight back to e2, bishop f6, offering a trade of the dark squared bishops. Now, do you want to take? Not necessarily, because you're letting the knight get active, right? And you have to worry about this e4 pawn being weak. Computer says you have to play f3 as the top move, and I mean, this just looks a little suspicious here with no dark square. I mean, look at all of the pawns are on light squares, right? This is not the time to be completing your side quests, okay? Okay, so queen to h5, bishop f6, and rook to c3. What's the point of rook to c3? Well, Magnus starts bringing his rooks up off the first rank to prepare some stacking going on, right? Some double stacks, maybe even some triple stacks. You know, because if they're on the first rank, they can't get on top of each other. So he gets the rook to c3, maybe getting over here to the king side, but also maybe preparing to double rooks on the d file, right? And pressure down this d6 pawn. We have bishop taking here and rook takes. Now we've got our heavy pieces on the diagonal here so that they can kind of pendulum over to whichever file they so please and create some powerful, you know, infiltration prospects right down the d file or even the c file. We have queen to e5, queen to d2. The knight goes to f6, hitting the pawn here on e4, so Magnus defends it. Shocker. He doesn't blunder the pawn. Now, this is very interesting. The rook's on the e3 and d4 square, the queen back on d2, and the knight here as well. This is very, very strange. But this rook is not able to get into the game because Magnus has done a very good job of creating this b3 stronghold, right? Supporting a4 and c4. Okay. So we have rook to d7, preparing to double rooks on the c file or even the d file, right? It's a flexible move. We have queen to g5, which loses the game. You see the eval jump up to plus 2.5 here. This loses the game to e5. e5. You can't ignore the pawn, right? Play d5 because you lose the knight. And if you try taking the pawn, well, then you lose your rook. You know, knight takes, queen takes, and you're up a piece here. So that doesn't work either. Okay, so you would have to drop the knight back to e8, and then after something like knight c3, and, you know, maybe if the queen goes back to e7, something like this, rook e to d3, and you're getting really nice pressure with this triple stack here down the d file, and you're not able to take this, or you lose the rook, right? So it's pretty annoying. It's pretty annoying here, dealing with this. It's almost an Alekhine's gun if the rook were here. It's very interesting, the triple stack on the d file. Okay, but let's go back. We have queen g5, which loses the game, but Magnus decides to play it after e5, which he does play. He decides to play it safe here and take on d6. He takes on d6 instead of playing b4, right, and trying to get some expansion here on the queen side or playing knight c3. He decides to just take the pawn on d6. Okay. Why is this not as good? Well, you're going to lose this pawn, right? You're not going to be able to push your c-pawn because you're going to get overextended, and this pawn is just going to fall, so you may be temporarily up a pawn, but the rook starts swarming, right? Magnus plays f4, kicking the queen back, but now that there's more pressure on d6, so we have rook e to d3 here, you know, triple stacking on the d file, trying to support this pawn, but if you count, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers on the d6 pawn and only 1, 2, 3 defenders. So Vishy takes, and every piece falls off the board except for the knights, and 6 pawns each. Now, we do have some slight imbalance here because we have a 3 on 2 and a 4 on 3 with the knights. Okay, Magnus decides, okay, let's walk our king. And why does it say +1 for white? Well, I mean, look at the king position. White has a much more active king and is constantly threatening to get in, take these pawns, and promote here. And just, you know, these pawns are further back. It's going to take a while to get them pushing, right? So that's why white is, you know, better in this endgame. We have knight c3, knight f5, and the knights start dancing. The knights start dancing around here. We have knight to d6. Here, the top move was knight back to d2. You know, keeping a handle on the position down here and trying to get the king to do some dirty work up here. But instead, we have knight up to d6. This is very interesting. We have g5, okay, and knight e8 check. This is a very fun little knight maneuver that Magnus does. Knight e8 check, the king chases the knight. Knight here check, the king chases the knight. Knight here check, the king chases the knight. And knight takes on h6, which you see blunders. It's a mistake here. Now black is even slightly better after gf4, although the computer only said that temporarily. It is now just evaluating it as a draw. But what Magnus had to do was not play knight takes h6. Knight f6 was better, keeping the knight more centralized, because after knight h6, king g7, and your knight's trapped. Your knight is indeed trapped. Now, I figure that Magnus saw this way back here. I mean, he probably saw it from move 2 in the game, right? But, he probably saw it here before he went on this little knight journey. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone on this excursion with the knight. And he probably saw that this is just a draw after knight takes f5 and ef5. Because the king is going to win these pawns over here. The knight is going to start taking these pawns in that time as well. And everything is just going to fall off the board. So, Magnus plays king b6. We have the knight taking the pawn, right? And actually, I may have misspoke earlier. I said that the knight would take these pawns and everything would fall off the board in due time. For now, it's a pawn race. Both sides promote. Magnus has 3 pawns and a queen, and Vichy has a knight and a queen. So material's equal. But it's very interesting with the pawns versus the knight, right? And if you go back, when I said Magnus saw that, yeah, definitely from here. Because otherwise, why would he go on this crazy knight journey without calculating the entire knight sacrifice and the entire pawn race here? And figuring, yeah, it's probably a draw. Or maybe I can win, push the pawns or something. I don't know. Yeah, just Magnus things. We have queen to d5, queen e1, and the queen starts shuffling. We get a check to the king here on b6. King slides out of the way. Knight c5 check, and Magnus loses the b3 pawn. Oh, no! It doesn't matter. We have queen c7, queen b6, and now the queen trade is forced because you got a little triangle going on here. This forces the queen trade, and this is just a draw. This is when everything falls off the board because the h-pawn, and Magnus even hands it over to Vichy. He says, yeah, you can take it. Go ahead. Go ahead. We have c5. Knight takes c5, and the game ends in a draw due to insufficient mating material. You could, take the knight if you wanted just kings on the board, but technically the game ends in a draw here because you can't checkmate with just a knight. But yeah, Magnus wins the championship with a draw. Now, it may have been a draw, but this was a very interesting game. We had lots of interesting stuff going on. We had the bishop pair temporarily for Vichy, Magnus taking control of the d5, the b5 squares, and we have this weird, rook maneuver getting into, the 3rd rank here, and then the 4th rank, and the triple stack on the d file, trying to push this d6 pawn, and then all the pieces fall off the board into a knight endgame, where Magnus is pushing slightly for a win, right? He gets the more active king, and he ends up going on a little knight spiritual quest, and sacrifices the knight to get a pawn race that results in simultaneous promotion, and forces the queen trade, and it's a draw. Did you know that the first game Magnus ever played on chess.com was against Rainn Wilson, the actor, Dwight Schrute from The Office? Insane, right? I found that out the other day, and I just had to make a video about it, so you should go check it out. All right, have a good one, guys.